So I've got a bit of a story to tell. It's been a while. This is the first day in about 50 years it's been above freezing, so hopefully I can start to poke around on this thing a little more. For the winter, I parked the Cherokee in the garage to keep it from rusting, and crossed my fingers that the truck would survive the XJ's hibernation. Firstly, this thing has really bad tires. If you saw the previous Comanche video, you may have noticed I ended up in a snowbank. And that's mostly because these tires are from 2003. Now usually tires last about 5 years, but these ones still got some life left in them, and sometimes I'm a cheap bastard, so I decided to keep them. This had the drawback of making it really difficult to drive anywhere, but the benefit of making any trip very interesting. At the end of that video, I mentioned wanting to get a car wash, but it was too cold. Since then, it's warmed up, and I made the mistake of driving this truck through one. Oh boy, that was an adventure. Water came through both windows. There's large holes in the floor, and well, yeah, anyway, I guess water somehow got inside the door and froze the handle mechanism, because when I got home and opened the door, it wouldn't stay closed. So on my next trip, I needed a way for the door to stay closed. So I locked it. But then the lock got stuck. So now it was stuck closed, and I spent the next few days crawling in and out through the passenger side. Later that week, Ronnie's dumbass decided it would be a good idea to turn around in a ditch. Now Ronnie has an all-wheel drive Subaru, and even so, he couldn't get himself out of the situation. So he did what any sensible friend of mine would do. He called me for help. So I drove a few miles out of town and found him and his Subaru in the middle of nowhere. And I really regret not making a video of this, but we were on a public highway, and I wanted to get him out of there as quickly as possible, so I didn't want to waste any time setting up the tripod and whatnot. Besides, every time I got out, I had to climb out the passenger side, so that was inconvenient. I hooked up a tow strap from the MJ's bumper to the Subaru sway bar, and without even touching the accelerator with the clutch half engaged, this truck pulled the Subaru out of the ditch like it was my ex pulling herself out of committed relationships. It did not even hesitate. Anyway, that's a story for another time, because after saving Ronnie and stopping at my next destination, I instinctively pulled the handle on the driver door, not remembering that it was stuck. And it opened. Magically. It fixed itself. Mere minutes after saving the Subaru. The Comanche effectively redeemed itself. Not only that, but perhaps me too. And I think such a title is worthy of application. Now the door mechanism obviously has something wrong with it, and it'll probably start malfunctioning again soon. But instead of actually fixing the problem like a responsible person, I think I'm just gonna take the doors off. The MJ shares doors with the 84 to 92 XJ, and hinges with 84 to 97 XJs. Of course, the doors on many vehicles are an essential part of the frame's integrity, but not the Comanche. The only safety concern of removing the doors is less protection and side impacts, but considering I'll die regardless of crash point, I don't think it's much of a sacrifice. If you have power mirrors, locks, or windows, there will be an electrical connector behind this kick panel here. But since this door panel is about as bare bones as can be and only features a speaker, and because the radio doesn't work anyway, I'm just going to remove this and forget about it. If you're doing this yourself, you'll have to do something about the door switch, either remove it or put some tape over it so the lights don't stay on. But since Comanche interior lights never work anyway, I don't have to worry about this either. Also, the door check. To get this off, you just hammer this pin out, but this one's already broken anyway, so I don't gotta worry about that either. There are 3 T40 Torx bits on each hinge, but before we remove those, I'm gonna mark where the hinge, door shim, and backing plate line up so that the door lines up properly when I put it back on. So apparently there isn't a electrical connector for the speakers behind this kick panel, so I've just taken the speaker out and I'm gonna shove these wires all up in here and just put them behind here with some electrical tape. Oh, it was actually broken. Wow. Cool. The outermost bolt you can get to with a ratchet, but for the back two, a ratchet won't fit in between here and the frame. So I'm using a crescent wrench, and I'm grabbing onto the Torx bit to turn it like that. It's a bit of a unique contraption, but it's working. The bottommost bolt on both doors was not coming out, so I had to grind the heads off. If you're doing this yourself, I would recommend drilling those out and retapping the threads so you can have all 6 bolts. But for my purposes, I think 5 out of the 6 is going to work fine. Well, miraculously, the doors are off, and yeah, I'm a bit blown back myself. This is wild. Anyway, our next step is going to be to cut the hinges right here and then pound them out up so they lift off, and then we can effectively slide the pin in like a Wrangler door so they're removable. Alright, now this is what we got. And now I'm going to pound off this part right here, I hope. This one is way looser than the other side. There we go. A little bit of peanut butter always does the trick. Talking about. Alright, now, hopefully this isn't still hot. It is a little hot. Alright, I'm gonna go do the top one. Now we need to lift them out with a little help from the hammer. Alright, look at that. We got Wrangler hinges. Alright, I've got everything laid out and in order. Everything is labeled, for example, driver's side top with the shim, the bracket, and the hinge. The next thing I'm going to do is the pins are a bit too long currently. I'm going to cut them about right here. I've already done the passenger side. This will make it easier to slide into the door, and the bottom part is actually a little bit thicker than the middle part, so we don't have to do any drilling in the frame mounted hinges. These will slide in much easier. Now this one actually broke when I hammered the bottom part off. That's how rusty this whole thing is. But luckily that was the only one that broke, and luckily it broke in that one spot. So I'm going to cut these ends off of probably about 1/2 inch off of the driver's side hinges now. So you can measure these precisely if you want, but there is kind of already a line there where it gets thicker at the end, so I'm just eyeballing it. Seems to be working all right. Now I'm going to take the cut pin, and nice and easy. There's one more cut we're going to have to do on the brackets. You will have to cut the bottom innermost corner on each one, all 4 of them, because when you go to slide in the door, this bracket will make contact with the hinge right there. So by just cutting out the corner, it'll allow it to slide past that into its original position. So I've marked about how much I'm going to cut off of there. You can barely see it. You don't have to be precise with this, because cutting off too much isn't really going to hurt anything. This is now what I'm left with on the bracket. Now we're ready to put the shim, bracket, and hinge back on the door in that order. Right now I did try fitting the doors on. I got the driver's side on. I did get the passenger side on, but it interferes with the fender right here. It chips away at it for some reason. Now you might notice this is a different color blue than the rest of the truck, and so is the header panel. So I think it was in some sort of minor accident, possibly similar to this one, and they replaced the header panel and fender. And this fender might be from a later model Cherokee, like a 90s Cherokee. So it might not be exactly the same as an 80s Cherokee fender. Now Now, it is mostly the same, but it might not be perfectly the same. I think that's the reason we're interfering a little bit here. So I think I'm going to try to cut that just a little bit. Probably like that much. And see if that works. I can get the door to go on if I loosen the hinges and, you know, make them adjustable. But I don't need to do that with the driver's side. Driver's side goes on. So I figured it was easier and probably a better idea to just cut the door. As you can see, just a tiny little bit. And, you know, I'll cover this with rust protectant or whatever. But if you look closely, it looks bad. But from a distance, I mean, can't look worse than the rest of the truck. So the doors open and close normally. And they're just sitting in the top of the hinge like Wrangler doors. So there's no bottom of the hinge anymore. I'm going to see if I can actually get it back off, though. That's the real question, because those hinge pins are so rusty, it makes it difficult to lift them off. Oh yeah, easy, nice. And that's it, simple as that. Putting them on is a bit difficult. Boom. I put some axle grease in there. Much easier. Alright, let's do it. This is what it's like to own a Wrangler. I want a Wrangler. But Comanches are cooler. It's probably where my seatbelt, that would be a good idea. It's cold. I think it's like 35 out today. But when it warms up, this is gonna be badass, man. I love this already. Good thing the heater works.
I think one of the coolest things about the XJ and MJ is that they weren't designed to have the doors taken off. Keep in mind, both of these vehicles existed before the Wrangler, and although Jeep didn't necessarily help us get the doors off, they didn't hinder us either. Armed with a T40 Torx bit, a hammer, and a very basic understanding of wiring, you can do this yourself at no cost. You aren't supposed to be able to take the doors off, but they're also not an integral part of the structure, and Jeep even provided a locking glove box standard, so it's implied they knew people would do this anyway. Things like this are why Jeep will never be topped in my book. There is elegance in simplicity.